But tonight we're here to celebrate National Poetry Month, and I'm glad to hand this one over to Justin Barisich, who is not only a copywriter and storyteller, but he is a very important member of the Broadleaf Board of Directors and also sits on the conference committee with us. He has read and reviewed, he says, more than 70 YA novels and has interviewed numerous award-winning best-selling authors about their lives and works along the way. If you want to find out more about Justin, you can find him at littlewritingman.com. And Justin, the show is yours, so have fun.
Yeah, thank you, Zach. I didn't expect myself to get plugged tonight, so I appreciate that.
We will plug everybody.
Me.
We will plug everybody except myself. So let's go.
Yeah, right. we'll plug Zach later. He's in the conference too. No. But we have some panels here that are darkened out. Let's get them to join the show as well. So Andrea, Donney, Ola, come on and join us on screen and vocally as well as soon as you can. Folks, I am super excited to be sitting here with these three phenomenal poets tonight. I know them all from my personal life, and I got the rare occasion to bring them all here in this digital version platform to talk with you all about one of the things that I love, poetry. It was my first love in writing, written my first poem at 11, got into it more in high school, got into it even more so in college, which is where I met Ola. Afterwards, I was doing some mentoring of youth poets, kind of giving back, which is where I met Donney. And then when I moved to Atlanta, I met Andrea and read her first book. She and I had kind of similar last names, you'll notice. We're both Croatian, and so we had that commonality there, right? And so it's interesting to see all of these different people from different walks of life coming together to talk about the same thing. So I'm real jazzed to be here. And also, you should just know these people and their writing, and they're just awesome folks. So with all that in mind, let me introduce you quickly. So ladies first, we have Andrea Jurjevic, who is, like I mentioned before, a Croatian poet and has moved to the States and is now currently a professor of poetry at Georgia State University, amongst being published and a translator. Published for her own stuff as well as translating other poets' stuff, mostly from Croatian. We have Donney Rose, who, like I mentioned, I met in Baton Rouge, where he was mentoring youth poets there. He has recently moved to DC and has taken on a great role as Johnny, what is your official role for the North Star?
Chief Content Editor.
Chief Content Editor for the North Star, which is a phenomenal publication talking about modern day issues in many different formats. And then Ola, who is just a genius. He's an engineer, developer, right? Computer engineer, computer scientist. And then like in his free time, he writes poems, right? And so he's just, being awesome out there. Very nice, very humble. And he just got married, right? So he's got a lot of inspiration to talk about. Just show that ring off. Yeah. He just came back from his honeymoon. So he is on cloud 9. To be talking with all of us this evening. So in addition to all of that, folks, we have a chat on the side. We have a Q&A. So if you have anything you want to ask me to verbalize to the folks, or if you want to ask them directly, please use that function. We also have Jessica, who's not seen here with us, but operating on the backside, kind of making sure everything is going smooth and throwing links in the chat. And if we say anything funny or weird, she kind of is there to promote it as well. So with all of that front matter now done out the way, my poets, it's National Poetry Month. What the hell have y'all been up to? What you been doing? What's been keeping you busy in honor of this great month? Anybody, take it away.
For me, I've just been trying to keep crafting pretty much on a regular basis. So much of my work right now is geared toward writing editorial pieces and writing, kind of think pieces for the North Star that I have to continue to remind myself, not necessarily remind, but make sure that I'm pushing myself to poet, as that is my first genre of writing. But one thing I learned a couple of years back, because my background had been primarily in slam poetry, was that I didn't have to focus on writing 3-minute poems. So my writing, I think, is actually strengthened now that I've consolidated to little small increments.
Ola, what about you?
Just got married. So that has been, planning a wedding and especially during this time, is a large undertaking. So a lot of my energy has gone there. And then you also mentioned I work in the daytime as a developer. So a lot of energy also spent there. When I'm not doing that, I'm kind of doing the work of reconstruction, maybe of myself, what kind of things I'm working on. Working on a full-length manuscript. Kind of had to have it out to people, or at least to presses, and just kind of doing the work, even before putting pen to paper, doing the work of what it is I want to say. Creating the right space.
So that pre-planning. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll talk more about that in just a minute. Andrea, let's pop on over to you.
Hey, I don't know where the idea of April being the poetry month originated, but I don't know. It's always like the busiest of months. So I don't know. I think, and this is not maybe unusual for me, but I'm always like sort of in another place and time in my mind. And where I am is a place where I have a little bit more time and I'm writing way better poems, if that makes sense. But I've got a chapbook coming out. It should come out next month if all goes as planned.
Nice.
It's from Willow Springs Books, and it's going to be part of their surrealist poetry series. And there's another book that I'm trying to. Yeah, there's stuff that I'm working on.
So with that one coming out next month, you're pretty much done with it, right? It's just waiting for it to hit the shelves or arrive in the mail.
Right, I'm waiting for the proofs to arrive, and we're in the final stages of laying out and collecting blurbs and all that.
Awesome. We will circle back to that. It's all part of this. Kind of the overview of tonight is talking about writing poetry, getting that published, and then poetry of place more specifically, which we'll dive into. And then we get a little reading at the end, everybody. So stay tuned for that. But so have you guys been doing any more like 30-30 kind of thing, 30 poems for 30 days for the National Poetry Month, which is a fairly common thing, or trying to perform more, put out some videos? I know COVID has kind of put a dampening on the live performance, but any sort of thing like that to promote? Anything that we could share with the masses?
So for me, I was continuing a project that I debuted in Baton Rouge last year called the American Audit. I had a virtual performance of it for the University of Illinois Springfield back in February, and another for the Ashe Cultural Center in New Orleans. So that is the actual full video from the original live performance that debuted in Baton Rouge 3 weeks before pandemic lockdown is on YouTube. So if you look up Donney Rose, the American Audit full performance, it is right there. And basically the American Audit is a multimedia spoken word project in which I use verse and I use interviews and I use imagery to have this extended metaphor of America as a business being audited by Black Americans 400 years post Jamestown, Virginia. So that's
a cool concept.
Thank you. So that's in the ether that can be viewed via YouTube. And once the pandemic hit, I was able to do a virtual switch. And so, as I said, at the end of February, I did a pretty good virtual show of it for University of Illinois Springfield. So that's what I got kind of in the fire. But in respect to the 30 for 30, I used to like really aggressively try to get at that the past few years, and I was like, you know what, I write poems pretty much every day. So why even stress myself to meet the metrics? So that's just kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, I a couple of years ago, I did it for the first time. I think it was 2015, which is not just a couple of years ago anymore. Time is weird. And then I tried to, I did it that year, and then I tried to do it the next year, and then the third year I did it, and then the fourth year it kind of tapered, and then I didn't ever circle back to it. And like you said, I'll write it when I write it, kind of thing. It's, I don't know, why write to the metric, But Ola, Andrea, anything?
Yeah.
In production wise.
I mean, a lot of my energy, I guess, of literary sense has been toward the full-length manuscript. Around the time COVID started, I had a couple of, I guess, events scheduled, and then those had to get pushed. And I also relocated to Atlanta during that same time period. So a lot was happening life-wise. With regards to crowd, I think I'm taking in a lot more poetry, reading-wise, than I guess writing it. And even on the tip of talking about prompts with, folks that I'm in community with across where I've been, Nashville, DC, wherever. Twitter is a great place to meet writers as well, as I've seen. So just kind of sharing prompts and kind of having your mind, jog through that. That's kind of where my mind has been. And I can't say I've written a lot of poems that I would say, hey, I could publish that one, but definitely keeps me nimble.
Yeah, and you brought up a very good point too. I keep saying, what have you written? But hell, what are you reading? Right? Like that's just as important. There's a comic strip called The Oatmeal, and he has one called Creativity is Like Breathing. And so it's usually pretty funny, but this one kind of gets a little deep, and he's talking about how you're constantly creating, you're constantly exhaling, but you have to inhale as well, right? You have to take something in order to keep creating, keep breathing, keep living. And so thank you for reminding me / us of that. Reading is fine too. Andrea, anything you want to chime in there? If not, no worries. I got other questions, don't worry.
I've got I feel like I have my own personal poetry periods. That's not necessarily the month of April.
Yeah.
Where I kind of have these more energetic bursts of creative energy, to call it. And then I'm aware of it, and then I carve out a little bit more time. I will get up earlier today, or I don't know, I'll turn the phone off in the middle of the day and take care of that. But it's not necessarily the way the calendar, tells. So whatever works for people.
That is a wonderful transition to my next question. Thank you. Just teed that one up for me. So let's talk about process, right? Let's transition here a little bit. So, you kind of, Andrea, I'm going to let you go first because you were already kind of dipping your toe in there. But, what is your process for writing? You said you kind of bursts of energy. Is it like an idea sparks and it hits you and you write on that? Is it like you give yourself a dedicated a week to write this, a day to do this? Is it meeting a sort of a quota or metric of sorts, like Donney touched on, or is it just like, what is that like for you? And then Andrea, go first, and then Ola, then Donney.
I don't give myself any. If I give myself a rule, I will never. I just don't work like that. I resist rules. I resist prompts. I resist being told what to do, even if it's me telling myself what to do. Basically, there's just it really, there is no structure. That doesn't look like any kind of structure on the outside, but it's very internal driven from the inside, and an idea might get sparked from listening to music, or just from going on a walk, or from just like reading for a few minutes and then sitting down to write in the morning, or from not reading at all. It doesn't really, I've got a lot of ideas. I'm not short on ideas. My bigger issue is finding the quiet time. That's more of it. But as long as I have that, then I'm good. And that's all.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I would say, just looking, if I'm just speaking historically as to what things have jogged, or I guess what environments have helped me. I like imagery. Like I'll sit and stare at a door. I told my friend this. I'll stare at the door and I'm like, hey, like what could I use that as an analogy for in a poem, and then like just kind of going off that, or just to kind of like Andrea said, taking walks. I do that pretty frequently at night. But I guess the execution part is pretty difficult, finding a time of day where you're not thinking about something else. And I know for me, I am not great at thinking about multiple things at the same time. So, with all that's happening in the world, it's like, it's hard to also kind of find, for me, in how my artistic sense works, quiet space mentally as well as like emotionally, to kind of like hone in on what I'm really trying to get at. That's been the most difficult thing, especially if we're talking about poetry at a place. These days, that's been my most challenging aspect of the craft of getting into that. So
we have to try the stare at the doorknob trick. That's a new one for me. I'm gonna see what that produces.
It works.
And Donney, how about you, man?
So I've been a performance poet for just around 21 years. So I say that, I preface that to say that whatever I've been inspired about has like cycled over the course of 2 decades. Primarily right now, I consume a whole lot of news for my job. And so I'm just consistently inundated with information. And a lot of the ways that I download the information that I'm acquiring is through poetry. Particularly over the last 8 or 9 years, a lot of my writing has been really geared toward the movement for Black lives, the space that we're in with respect to, racial inequality, police brutality, et cetera, et cetera. So what a lot of my writing has looked like is trying to figure out various nuances to tell what may be a repeated story. And I can't necessarily pinpoint when those moments of inspiration come. There have been times where a spark for an idea popped up in my head at 4 a.m. based on something I may have downloaded at 10 p.m., right? Something I may have read right before I went to sleep. So at 4 a.m., I'm up, trying to hide the cover over my phone so that I'm not blinding my wife with the light of my phone, a poem, right? And so, I think that right now, a lot of, probably all of my work is, heavily social commentary based. And so it comes mostly from information that I'm just kind of consuming on a daily basis.
So Donney, that actually, once again, you guys are doing great with transitioning my questions here, and you have no idea what I'm about to ask you. You guys are wonderful. These are true poets, guys, true poets. So Donney, I'm going to ask you, and then we'll go around the table, just because you sort of touched on it already. But yeah, how do you keep going back to the well to write about the same topic over and over again, right? Like, it is the same thing, but you said you're approaching it from different angles, right? Talk to me more about that, right? What is that process like for you?
So that can look like a lot of different things. Primarily, that can look like playing with different forms. Okay. So, for example, let's say I was writing a poem about Kim Potter, the officer who just shot Dante Wright. The poem may be an open letter to Kim Potter, or it may be a persona poem written in the voice of Kim Potter's taser telling her gun, wait, hold on, you're using the wrong tool, right? Okay. So what that looks like a lot for me is experimenting with various forms and experimenting with various voices and various identities within the poem. Because like the messaging topically, you may not necessarily find a whole lot of variance topically, but in poetry, there are a million different approaches, right? There's the I'm about to walk straight through the front door approach. There's the I'm slipping through the back window approach. There's the I'm hiding, beneath the floorboards approach. And so, I think that for me, after years and years of crafting, what I've finally gotten to a place of is giving myself permission to try on weird choices in my writing. You know what I mean? And I will say this, and I'll go ahead and move on. When I was heavily participating in Slam, Slam has something kind of a structure, with respect to how poems succeed and how they land. Once I got outside of that format, I think it opened me up structurally. So I'm attempting things that may seem odd or may seem weird, but it's just the way my mind is processing the information in the time. And so, yeah, just, if you're writing about a similar subject, often you have to find the various ways to approach it and the various nuances. And you got to like pull in your poetry toolbox, with respect to form, with respect to devices, and figure out what's the most creative thing to say, what you're trying to say.
Awesome. A million different approaches, people. That's your golden nugget from Donney Rose tonight. My other two poets, you guys want to chime in on that? No pressure. Once again, you can tell me go the hell away. I got more questions.
I mean, it's hard to kind of addend to that because, so Justin knows this. I met Justin Vanderbilt Spoken Word. So like Slam, that stage, it definitely means something to us. And with regards to, in another sense, well, part of it's that, the taking of Black lives is a redundant matter, at least in terms of like, it becomes desensitized to our community. And so it's not that their lives mean any less, it's just that when we're explaining it, the exhaustion of trying to re-explain something, you have to kind of maybe, okay, well, maybe I can do an erasure in this form and do a guzzle this time, and the form kind of taking that next step in terms of bringing the voice to maybe be more impactful to the reader in any sense of the word. So I definitely agree that like experimentation keeps it fresh for not just the reader perhaps, but also for like your heart and what you feel like you can lend to the poem. Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with what he just said, so I don't have much to add, but
no, it's totally fine.
Donney.
Keeping it fresh for yourself and your readers. Totally.
Forgot what you asked, Justin.
How do you keep going back to the well repeatedly to keep writing about the same topic, perhaps in a different way?
There's only the well. You kind of have to. Okay, so this is my thing. When I first started writing in English, I thought that maybe I went to journalism school, and for a minute I thought I was going to be a journalist or write for magazines. Mm-hmm. Okay, aside that I'm a slow writer and a number of other things that made me not succeed there. There's the other thing about journalism, and I'll get back to the well in just a second.
Sure.
And that is that in journalism, it's all about what happened, right? And everybody's telling the same story of what? And I'm a little bit like too precious, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to be telling the same story. I want to tell a different story, my own story, right? And in poetry, it's not so much about what it is that we're telling, but so much more about how it is said. And that's where, obsessions are not so much like the reality of what happens in the real world, but actually the private obsessions that we have within us, I guess, that's what comes to mind when you're talking about the well. That's an inexhaustible kind of thing, because I can lean into those obsessions all the time and hopefully not bore myself or the reader, because there's no end of like gnawing on them. That's what comes to mind when it comes to these things.
Yeah, you guys are once again poets, the golden nuggets throughout this whole talk, and we're not even halfway done. You guys are wonderful. So let's expand on that a little bit further, right? So you keep going back to the well, you keep writing about something, you write enough, you got enough to make a chapbook, right? You got enough to make a collection. So how is that? How does somebody who hasn't done it yet, one day hopefully, how do you is it I have a core idea and I keep attacking that multiple times? I write 100 poems, 50 of them are keepable and publishable. Is it I have written 50 poems about whatever, perhaps not related, and those come together into something publishable? Is that something that you write on your own, compile, and then shop around? Or is it have you already reached out to an agent with an idea and they kind of push you to do that, follow that path and write the stuff? I don't know if you all have similar, different experiences, but I'm gonna let Ola go first because I don't think you've gone first yet.
All righty. For me, it's been kind of leaning on those in industry. Or even, I have not gone to school I was engineering in undergrad, spoken word. I was, one of a few engineers in that club. And then, I haven't had schooling in it, you can say in a proper sense. So I've had close comrades of mine that the MFAs and PhDs. And so kind of leaning on them to see like what, I have, I guess to Andrea's point, I have written enough, I feel, about this particular theme, and I've kind of, I guess, exploited my obsession with it. And I feel like there is a commonality there and a fabric that I feel like could mean something in the world for those that come into contact with it. So, what it is to flow. I think like right now I'm much more adept at that, like writing poems and that lead into each other, understanding like, the brevity of the power of the brevity of poems. Like writing a short poem, I'm learning that still. Donney mentioned it earlier. Having like, understanding like, oh, you have 3 minutes now. It's like, oh, write a long poem or write a short poem, whatever that may mean. So like compiling a chapbook, my experience has largely been actually about chopping, because it's more a matter of like, there's definitely going to be fat, and poems that linger, I guess, on the opposite end of it. And so what poems kind of, it may not be about which poems you maybe feel the closest to with regards to like chapbooks, because I've definitely cut poems like, oh, you know, talk to editors, hey, I want this poem, and they're like, it doesn't really fit with the rest of that, you know, what's coming together here. So especially in chapbooks, being mindful of that you're gonna probably encounter, you know, chopping fat in ways that you didn't think you would. But you know, the point being, you're expressing this concise world to people, and that's the point of the matter. So that's my experience with chapbooks. And I mean, I don't think I've gone into any one poem saying, hey, this is going to be the poem that makes or breaks this future project. Because if you have that kind of attitude, then you're kind of limiting what you can do with that poem and what it's doing for you. So, yeah.
And Ola, your forthcoming thing, is that a chapbook or collection?
That one's full length.
Okay, so what's the difference there between the chapbook?
The difference there, I think my chapbook, I would say, very not as layered.
Okay.
And I would lend, I guess, my full length is, for me, self-interrogation focused. I think a lot of it's pretty much focused on Black masculinity, or even masculinity in itself, and like the privileges I have in that construct. So, you know, it was very layered. A lot of things I had to, and you know, I didn't necessarily think, you know, 3 years ago, hey, I'll be writing about that, but certain things kind of have come over time. And it's like, hey, like, you know, maybe you could think about meshing these together and see what they're saying. So the full length is kind of part you're writing things for a while for me, and then part like, hey, like, ooh, I wonder if I, you know, the free writes and things like that kind of come together and also lend to the larger project. So yeah.
Nice, thank you. Donney, I want you to go next, because Andrea, I'm going to throw a little spin at the end of it. So when you answer, keep you on your toes.
Yeah, so I only released 2 chapbooks pretty much over the course of my career. One was a little over 10 years ago. I self-published it, and the other was published by a small independent press. The first one was like, I guess, a greatest hits or whatever I was reading at the open mic in the slam at the time. So it was like, it wasn't thematically structured or nothing, you know what I mean? Like, I had one poem that I was reading a lot called Full Circle, and I named the chapbook Full Circle. So it was kind of like an album, right? Where like whatever the hit single might be, you just name the album that's after the and so, you know, with Full Circle, it was just a random collection of poems. And I mean, you know, I put it out in the world pretty much like it was a random collection of poems. We ran off copies at Kinko's, like the long staple situation or whatever. It served its purpose at the time.
Yeah.
But in 2015, I worked with a smaller press to produce a chapbook called The Crying Book. And I like to speak to what Ola was just talking about. So The Crying Book thematically was around vulnerability through the lens of Black masculinity, right? And so this whole idea of the buck being an archetype during slavery that was strong and virile and unbreakable, and this idea of like a crying buck, like really exploring, you know, humanity within Black masculinity, exploring, you know, the nuances or what have you. And this was in the era of, you know, killing of Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Eric Garner, et cetera, et cetera. And what happened in that particular case was that I was seeing a kind of collection of themes that were going across different poems that I had been writing. And so when the person that was running the indie press approached me about putting together a chapbook, it was a matter of me going back and looking at things that I had been writing like a year and a half leading up to it, and connecting the dots thematically and adding a few more layers right before the final product. And so, you know, in that particular case, that was, you know, so that was that chapbook, the other one I mentioned, and I put out like 3 spoken word CDs. The Crying Buck chapbook was by far my most successful poetry product because it was the most focused, and it was theme specific, and it came from a place to where the poems told a story, like collectively they told a narrative themselves. And so, I'm not going to say that having a theme is a definite prerequisite. I will say it helps, because it allows you to guide your potential audience in a particular direction.
And like Ola said, trim that fat, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because it's I assume these are all your babies that you've written, right? And you want to keep them all, but not all of them get to sleep in this bassinet, right? And so it makes it easy to say this one was over there.
Right.
Yeah. So Andrea, same question to you, and that is the process of pulling together. You've gone to the well, you've written the stuff, pulling together into a chapbook / collection / full-length thing. But then throw in the new element of a translation, right? So what you've been doing a lot of as of late. So how did that plays in this whole mix?
I'm a kind of a person that likes a lot of variety, that just keeps my mind alive. Because I kind of think that the worst thing for me personally when it comes to life and writing is the worst thing is being bored, which I don't get very often, but this definitely keeps me far away from it. I agree with what Donney and Ola said, in the sense that like full length, it's kind of like, let's say the well is, I don't know, the farmer's market. I'm just making this up. Okay. Sure. You come home with all these groceries and you dump them all on the kitchen counter. And that's the material you have. And you select the stuff that you think is worthy. And you have to be a little ruthless and get rid of the stuff that's just not fully cooked. I mean, no, this doesn't work. That doesn't, just whatever.
Extend that metaphor. Keep going.
Yeah, whatever. And so to me, a book is a little bit like preparing food for a party that goes on for hours. Okay. And you have to keep the guests fed and a little bit drunk the entire night, but you don't want them to pass out like 2 hours in because you want to keep them going. Does that make sense? So you gotta like figure this out. Whereas a chapbook, you got this party and it's really important, and you've got a brunch to impress them, and that's your goal. So like
one shot.
It needs to work together really, really tightly. Okay. And for me, and frankly, the reason that one of the reasons why I initially started translating was that I was just so tired of my own voice or voices that I needed to step away from it. I could not stand my own writing for a minute. And yes, I read a lot of people, and I do other stuff. I have a life, but I just like whenever I would sit down, I felt like, oh my God, I'm just gonna I can't stand my own self anymore. I needed to feel as if I was somebody else. So translation is really good like that, because you can't translate a poem in particular unless you completely sort of enter it and assume the style of the original author. And that helped me take a break from myself, and that's wonderful.
And then having had that break, now you come back to your own normal writing, your own normal voice, right? With all new insights, and you got this new book coming out.
There is no going back. I am a different person at that point.
Even better.
And now I'm doing it faster. I switch back and forth. And honestly, it's probably what we all do to an extent, in the sense that, I don't know, do you ever like look back through an old photo album or something, and you remember a memory from 25 years ago, and you look back and you think like, oh wow, that old me, it's almost like a different person.
Yeah.
You know, so it's that kind of experience, just much faster.
Well, I would say totally understand, but I don't speak any languages very well beyond English, so I'll have to say yes, I understand. But on a topical level.
So much of poetry in America that is in translation was translated in pairs, like American poets translated with the native speakers of those original languages oftentimes. So, I guess you don't need to be super proficient in the original language.
Gotcha. Awesome. Thank you for that perspective. That's one I knew very little about until this conversation. So thank you. So let's shift gears a little bit right now. So the title of this whole talk is The Poetry of Place, right? So we're in interesting times, hopefully nearing the end of COVID, shelter in place, COVID, can't travel, all those restrictions, right? And so place is very interesting, right? Whereas your setting and your story for your characters, it's core to almost anything that you write. But it's even more so, I think, interesting now because we've kind of been stuck in place, kind of been sheltering in place for the most part, right, for our own health and safety. And so I'm curious as to, with all this in mind, how has that impacted your writing, just in general? Have you become, more prolific? As you change your style, your quality, your frequency, right? And then we'll start there. I have lots more questions. We'll start there. Who wants to go first?
I mean, I can begin quickly.
Yeah.
I think initially, early in the pandemic, I was just trying to address the elephant in the room head on with all of my writing. So I was writing a lot about the pandemic itself. So last April, during National Poetry Month, I attempted a 30 for 30, which I never got to the end of. That was called Viral Voice. And it was a series of poems in the persona of various things related to COVID-19. So I had a persona poem in the voice of an N95 mask. I had a persona poem in the voice of Dr. Fauci's bed, begging him to come and get rest. I had a persona poem in the voice of TikTok. You know what I mean? So it was just like these random different pieces, because the only place that I could really be in was like the confines of my home. So in order to imagine a world outside of that, which was, basically like isolated and sealed off, I had to put myself in this kind of like character space of these different things that were impacting the world around me, right? So I knew that there were, hospitals, and so like, what did it look like for me to write a persona poem in the voice of a ventilator? You know what I mean? I knew that there was like one poem I wrote for Easter. I wrote a poem in the voice of the Easter egg bunny, wondering where all the children were, right? So it was really just a matter of tapping into the isolated and closed world around me to find that place.
Ola, you go.
This is a question I probably won't say much about,
Sure.
actually, because my job is related to healthcare, and so much of my day is spent with the thought of like the data that I'm working with is very particular to healthcare, and like, if it's not that, then obviously we're taking in the news. So writing, even furthermore, became a sense of like escapism, where like, but not in the sense of like I could really escape from like I like Donney. I kind of taken a lot of social commentary, and I feel like, you knew this at Vanderbilt. A lot of people said, "Hey, I write social commentary poems." I'm like, okay, that's me. I'll take that identity. That's fine. But my wife says is adamant, refrains like home is where the heart is. So not necessarily. I am where I am, Atlanta, but at any one point, if it's Breonna Taylor or Makia Bryant, like, it's where they are, what's happening to them and what's happening with those lives as well. So I am in the place right now of kind of still challenging myself to just reconstruct and learn more about the things I'm privileged to experience and think about. So a lot of my writing about place is still like where my heart is at the moment. So it may not be like spatial, I guess, as much as like just what I feel emotionally. And if it is a persona, then it's taking the persona of like, a lot of my poems are like Black Boy Calls Shotgun, or Black Boy provides its disclaimers, and just you can substitute Black Boy from whomever you want, Donney Rose, et cetera, et cetera. But that kind of like doing that work of like series of understanding perhaps survivor skill, perhaps a little bit about, where I'm coming or where I've been and where I'm going. So that's kind of where I am with poetry and place.
Yeah. Building your own internal worlds and then head hopping, right, into other people's, right? Cool.
Absolutely.
Andrea?
I kind of had a strange, I think it was strange, experience during this pandemic, in the sense that I felt like suddenly my personal world got louder than usual. So as much as a lot of people, and I could see, genuinely struggled with having to stay at home and having limited or no social interactions, I didn't find it difficult. I do love people, some people at least. But I didn't miss anybody. I do have, 2 kids, so it's not like I was by myself all the time. But with work going online, I think what happened was, especially those early months, if you guys can still remember, like we were constantly online. And I was so exhausted, fatigued from screens, fatigued from teaching and meetings online and all of that stuff, that I simply became terribly needy for quiet time and for quiet space. So I did not write about the pandemic, nor do I intend to, but I typically take usually a little bit more time to process things and to write right away. That's just the way I am. But I have become aware of how much I appreciate the quietness and how much I also appreciate nature and just going out for a walk, and how lovely it is to see that the world might be going upside down and the nature is still just it's instantly beautiful and doing a thing, and so on and so forth. So that's been me. I write about the same amount as I did before, but just need a little bit more quiet, I guess.
Yeah, I feel like most writers, this may be a generalization, are more introverted than extroverted, just broadly brushstrokes here. And I don't know, I have found that a lot of writing-minded folks have enjoyed the, I don't have to go out, I don't have to go to other places, I can sit here in my own space and do my own thing, right? And whether that's for their own peace of mind or for their, writing, for their craft development or becoming more prolific, just like you mentioned, Andrea, it's a rare opportunity, and they're trying to exist in that space and make the most of it. But
well, I mean, not to make it about me, but honestly, one thing that I think that was kind of wonderful about this last year or so is that, at least for me, I got to really feel what I'm like as my own company. And I kind of like my own company, and those people who don't like their own, I kind of feel bad for them. I mean, I guess, I don't know, maybe I'm being silly here, but it's true.
I would agree. I think a lot of people never had to spend that much time with themselves, and so they would always distract themselves with going out and other people or going to drink, going to whatever. But now that you're stuck at home with you, who are you, right? Getting to know thyself, and that's a lot of that what Olatunde touched on, that head hopping and internal world building, right? In that way. So let's explore the idea of place a little bit further, right? So we talked about sheltering in a place where you couldn't go anywhere, but each of you, and in addition to being awesome poets and people, I brought you collectively, the three of you here tonight, because you all have ties to some other place, right? To somewhere than where you currently are. And I think that's very interesting, and how that affects your writing and the things you write about. So like I mentioned before, Andrea, she was born in Croatia and now lives in the States, right? So she's got family and friends and relatives there. Donney, I just mentioned a few months ago, moved up from Baton Rouge, where I think you were born and raised, and then to DC just a few months ago, or DC area. And then Ola has got ties to Nigeria, right? Your mom is full-blooded Nigerian, right? And so you guys said that no? Is she half? What?
Dad is.
Dad, pardon me, Dad.
Yeah.
But you have strong ties to that country and that culture and all of that, right? Is through your family, right? Coming through down to you. And so I'm very curious about how those ties to other places make their way into your writing. So Ola, because I messed up your genealogy, I'm gonna let you go first.
I mean, it's interesting because, I don't really care. My dad wasn't that active in my life, so I have this interesting connection with Nigeria in that, because of my name, people see my name, okay, he's Nigerian, maybe he has a big nose, like I'm just gonna assume where he's from. There's a lot of conversation about it. And it's just a sense of wanting to be proud of a place that you want more connection to, interestingly enough, that you don't quite have. And so you're kind of like on that fence of, hey, like, and it's also interesting because I guess I'm from Chicago, which the place, and Chicago, and they're very proud of Chicago usually.
You Chicago folks,
so, like,
love your
pride,
city.
yeah, pride is a very big thing with regards to home.
Yeah.
For me, at least being raised that way in Chicago, and so wanting that same experience with Nigeria, at least as much as so. That's how I kind of think about place, and even probably why I think about masculinity as much as I do now. I just entered into a lifelong union with my wife, and so, like, thinking about what things I have kind of underneath the surface for me, my relationship with my dad, or my relationship with, like, guys, or just, like, a relationship with home, wanting to tackle those things because they mean more to me than I can express. And I say twofold, because can is probably a matter of capacity, and probably a matter of, like, desire. So trying to attack that head on has been a very interesting challenge, and one that kind of I guess I'm competitive in a certain way, and so it's like, I want to know more about myself, and what I represent, and who I am to my brothers and my wife, etc., and to the world. That's interesting, kind of talking about what it is that place is, and obviously we're all inextricably linked to our identities, linked to where we're from. So, and I guess really who we are. So you're born, Donney was born in Baton Rouge. You never have to cheat and choose that, Andrea the same, you both from Croatia. So even if you choose that for yourself, but, like, it's who you are. So, like, how do you share that vibrantly with the world?
That's beautiful. Oh man, it's like you're a writer.
Yeah.
Okay, Andrea, Donney?
So for me, I'm 40. I'll be 41 in August. The first 40 years of my life were in Baton Rouge, literally up to my 40th birthday last August. I moved to Maryland, Hyattsville, Maryland, which is 6 miles outside of DC, in October. So Baton Rouge and South Louisiana, up to this point, completely and totally, in many ways, impacts my writing, because that's what I know. What I've come to learn in the area is I found my way to navigate around a few streets. I'm kind of familiar with the weather patterns. I know that there's a mall across the street from my apartment building. That's about it. You know what I mean? So I really can't get into too much with respect to the DMV or Hyattsville. I've learned things about the area, but my experience in my writing heavily comes from a lens of, South Louisiana, a lens from Baton Rouge. Now, is that to say that that's exclusively what I write about? No. But I think that no matter what I write about topically, there is that lived experience that informs my direction, So if I'm talking about things such as, classism or racism or homophobia or misogyny, I'm thinking specifically about my lived experience in Baton Rouge and in South Louisiana, seeing all of these things through the lens I saw them there. So no, I haven't gotten enough miles under me where I am to be impacted by anything other than my place of origin.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, even if you don't actually write about it, it still comes through, right? Even if that's not the topic at hand, it still finds its way, right? Like somebody said, it's woven into the fabric, it's sewn into who you are.
Yeah.
Andrea, go ahead. I'm sorry, I feel like I cut you off.
No. Yeah, this is such an interesting and complicated question for me. I could talk about it for a long time, but I'll just say this, that I was born in what was then Yugoslavia. And so if I'm being true, I should tell people I'm from Yugoslavia, but the thing is, like, that country doesn't exist anymore, which I am not sure what that makes me.
That's super interesting dynamic.
And then it was while I was in high school that, we had the war and the country fell apart. Croatia became independent and so on and so forth. And then in my early 20s, I moved to the United States. Without realizing that I was going to stay at the time. So what happens is that, while, you kind of carry all of your experiences within you, not just places, but people and relationships and all sorts of stuff. We carry it inside us, and there's our subconscious mind that might float up as we right. But the thing about not just being from elsewhere, but about living in a foreign country, even though, I don't know if I can still call America foreign, because at this point I have been here as long as I've been back home, but it still feels to a degree foreign. I feel maybe foreign or something like that. The thing is that you there's a kind of sense of, I want to say, longing and a sense of loneliness that become part of your everyday experience. For me, which doesn't mean like that I'm feeling shitty all the time, but it's sort of like there. and I think part of it is tied into the fact that you lose a kind of identity, you lose a self you had, and I can't go home because Yugoslavia doesn't exist. And I think everybody experiences this to a degree with, you go back to where you grew up and the place has changed. You also kind of start becoming somebody else, multiple selves. And sometimes, and I just thought about this the last few days, because I was, when I was working on something for this chapbook of mine, in which I think some of these themes are sort of interwoven in it, is this idea that once this new place that you live in becomes no longer foreign, it's really likely that you might become a foreigner to yourself, if that makes sense. You kind of feel like, well, who am I now? What have I become, and what do I call myself? And especially if you get to your 40s, you just kind of have been a number of people. I don't to a degree, yeah. I don't know if that makes sense. I don't mean to sound deranged, but
no, you're fine. I'm not there yet, but I definitely feel now that I'm in my 30s that there are different versions of me throughout my existence, right? And so, hearkening back to those earlier versions of self, you're like, that's not me anymore, right? And I don't want to go back to that. And it's super interesting. I always feel that whenever I go home, like to my parents' place, like I said, I knew Donney from Baton Rouge. I grew up outside of New Orleans, and so every time I go home to my folks there, it's a different version of myself. I feel is going back, right? And almost you like an old pair of shoes, slide on this old version of yourself when you're around those people, right? And if you don't like the version of yourself, you got to push a little back, right, against those other folks to make space for your new version of yourself. And so it's interesting, right? I get it. And maybe to a lesser extent, but I get what you're saying. You're not deranged, I promise. So folks, I want to end with a poetry reading, right? You are all poets. We're here to celebrate National Poetry Month. And so we are nearing the end of our time. We're going to go just a few minutes over, if everybody would so kindly stay with us, hear from all these three great poets here. And so we're going to go in order of alphabet. So alphabet by first name. So we'll go with Andrea, and then Donney, and then Ola. And so go ahead and pick. I know I had you guys grab a poem or two you wanted to read. Pick one that'll be about a minute or two, and then let the people hear what you got going on. And I'm going to give you a second. I'm going to keep just spitballing, Andrea, until you found your poem. I know I have to put you on the spot here, but I haven't been reading as much. I've been writing as much as I would have wanted throughout National Poetry Month, and so this is an opportunity for you all to make me more educated, to make me a better writer and poet, and influence me, right? And so, I've read Andrea's book, Small Crimes, a number of years ago when it first came out. And so I'm curious to see what she's got here for us, and then to hear what Donney and Ola have as well.
All right, I will read. I'll read a poem titled "Department of Dream Justice." It's a prose poem, so you don't need to know that. It just
context. It's good. It's fine.
Why I said that. And it's composed of how many? 7 but brief parts. Okay. So it just kind of reads, and it sort of dips in and out of dream world. So we are in reality, then we don't know where we are, right? Okay. 1. I return home, sit on the pier, and listen to rocks suck the sea like Frank Booth on Blue Velvet. At dawn, my sister yanks me awake, and the oval shell of the world cracks open. Boats gape like a line of polished funeral shoes. A cortege of animals gallops fluently by our house, their muscular architecture covered with lush white wool. The garden beds are dry, laundry lines bare. Sister says, "Come back soon." We close our eyes, wish for rain, and wake in another dream. On streets of distant towns, each of us alone carries keys from our old house, looks to unlock a door that fits the key. 2. Your palms close around the book of my hips, the minor tongue my hips are inscribed in. Your palms, 2 walls within which I sing. 3. For years, I spent nights drifting over wheat fields and vacant parking decks, and the wind whistled a long narcotic tune. On the sandbank tonight, shards of broken glass, the river licking its shore clean like a dog nursing its wound, and the moon, translucent, is a soap bubble on your glistening back. My bones are hollow. There's a quick flutter of wing beats. You turn, holding back the curtain of the night, and say, baby, don't you see you're home? 4. For eternity, we are a house on fire. 5. The man with a boat on a leash. The bailor dancing naked in my living room. The man eating sea urchins in his bathtub, spray painting eels into silver bedroom whips, singing of hollow canyons. The man with 2 pistols against his skinny waist. The man rapping about white knuckles. My father eating goulash his mother fixed from his pet pigeons. How he sobbed in our sea-splashed house after she died. The man with a horse torso digging a trench of doubt. American outage. I have a fondness for tight spaces. I tell you about each one I tucked myself into. The addict on the waterfront who always almost returned. The man who smelled of autumn. The man tearing along on his guitar like an overnight train, singing El dolor que tengo yo, el dolor que tengo yo. 6. The swallows didn't return this year, sister writes. Their nests still line the eaves of the roof. 7. Baby, I want to be a swallow, smallest, bluest of them, skim the surface of the sea at sunset, feed in flight, build a cup of warm mud in the cover of someone else's large house, wake up in the mornings, and while my children still sleep, feel like it is me who keeps them safe. Thank you.
Snaps, just snaps. That's beautiful, Andrea. I the whole idea of this is poetry place, and like I was there. I was transported. Beautiful imagery. I was, just. That's why I enjoy your writing. I was looking at some of your poems earlier today from Small Crimes, and I was like, yeah, this is still there, still true, still love it.
Yeah.
Oh man, Donney, go ahead, man. Take us away.
All right. So I have 2 pieces to share. One is very small, and the other is not as small, but not long at all. So this first poem I wrote pretty much after we moved from Baton Rouge to Maryland. I come from a land of convict leasing, of sky-high sugarcane crops and ghost blood that stains the soil. I relocated the furthest north of American slavery to a land that borders a chain link distance between freedom and captivity. America is an expansive plantation. Oppression stretches for acres and mile markers and highway exits. I have landed in a more progressive geography, but the whip never dulls. Freedom is still a distant destination. All right. And the next thing I'm going to read is one of the segments from the American Audit. And it begins with the definition, as they all do. That's defining a term from an audit. Scope. The audit scope is the extent and boundaries of an audit. It generally includes physical locations, organizational units, products, projects, or processes, and the time period. Mississippi be like, Alabama be like, Georgia be like, South Carolina be like, North Carolina be like, Virginia be like, Louisiana be like, Kentucky be like, Missouri be like, Florida be like, Arkansas be like, Maryland be like, trauma destination be like, Crack that whip for cotton. Crack that whip for tobacco. Crack that whip for sugarcane. For can't see out my disfigured eye. For bones too old to work like they did when I was a child you got at a discount. For quivering lips confused as back talk. For crying about my baby sold fresh out the womb. For not carrying the dead body off the field. For having the audacity to sweat and tire and plead for empathy after lashes lacerated midnight flesh to sunset pink. What we know of trauma unattended is it migrates the marrow of bloodlines it's exposed to. What we know of power unchecked is that it acts as a defect, a cognitive disorder disassociating the victimizer from the victim, which is to say the whip is a shapeshifter. Became the pen that wrote restrictions, the keys that locked away descendants of its victims, the gun of the slave patrol turned police, the syringe that injected poison for experimentation, the crack that splintered public housing, the color line dividing hues and hair textures. Watch a tool of destruction be reintroduced to the market, new and improved for every ounce of progress gained by those it was meant to destroy. America is an assembly line of whips, a 365-day producer of punitive instruments designed to break the will of Black folks. More sophisticated with every advancement of property turned people, which is to say, if 13% of the population are routinely pitched a product designed to devalue, deconstruct, demoralize, we own every right to recall this abuse and every piece of metal and bone and fear that made it serviceable. 400 years of defect does not make for anything salvageable. It makes for an enterprise of error that needs to issue lifetime rebates for humanity's destroyed. What's the move, America? The signs demanding a refund on your flawed terms and conditions are not coming down anytime soon.
Snaps. The internet is snapping for you, Donney. And that the line that jumped out at me was the trauma untreated migrates to the bloodline. I may have I'm sort of quoting that. I don't know exactly what it was.
Yeah.
That's yeah, and that becomes who you are, what you take with you to the place that you are, right? And that just continues to cycle. And so that was beautiful. And Ola, kick it on over to you. Close us out with the. What was that?
Giving me chills.
Chills. You got a lot of chilling.
Giving me chills. I was going to read something out of here. I don't think I will. I'll probably just try to read a new poem.
New stuff.
Poems, I guess. Yeah. So the first one is called A Probable Cause. So I'll go into it. Is it just me, or is this a continent of sanity I brought out of this house party? I won't fuss about it. Each noise complaint ready to be spout. Each becoming that plummets into another log, recording our feel-good Sierra as disturbing the peace. So clarify whose peace? All my life I've been sharp, been a black key shunted into the peripheral. The world off-white to your liking, made in the similitude of founding fathers bothered by the thought of us. Norms change by the day in dichotomy of agency I haven't yet reached. I sing of rose water, senna, and mulberry leaves. I have no further vantage point to consider the fourth from. The more improbable, the more problem. And that's word to my stubble, my boundless biopic to be. And that's word to the month of February in this, a new leap year. Vowels round as the cellulite on me beneath the steeple I sat. The conversations were all that and more as they knocked on my door. Reasonable suspicion dictates no chorus, only a score of headlights and rap sheets. A preference to scatter a kind of scatless jazz demarcating my ambush in an abandoned meadow. Surely I am superstitious of the cease and desist that tries even the sugar in my grits. Surely you should lower your voice when you talk to me. I'll warrant that. And if you say that's reason enough to frisk me, let me get my things first. I won't be long. I won't be brief. The harpsichords know me well. And that's word to my glove compartment. And whatever else on this fine earth you shall dust from my prints. That's the first piece. And then second one, because Home of the Heart is, Second one, love poem, which I'm working on writing more of. So it's called Like a Million Sunsets on Bootleg.
That's a great title. You got my interest. Let's go.
You had me at daylight savings, at the risk of sounding too high maintenance. You had me at matinee. How fleeting was a way to chronicle the drapes, the rays, and our looming insurrection. If you must know, it wasn't glamorous when I was yours truly for the first time. That winter was full of antics and keepsakes, the swindle of childlike and wanting to escape to nowhere better. You had me at foolproof, though those weren't the words we used. Honestly, half the time words weren't that at all. It seemed like hints at nutrition. From here, like the sparks off the tips of a bonfire, the splendor of s'mores and carnival funnel cake. You had me at, for real, as in the hours we spent flabbergasted during scenes where our desires felt derivative. Our bewilderment so in sync, we lingered there in the pitch black. After the credits had scrolled their way back to the clouds, our minds were last. That's that one.
Snaps. Snaps, snaps, snaps. I would clap, but clapping hurts the microphone and thus all of your ears. So just snaps all around. But guys, thank you. And then guys and lady, thank you for joining me tonight and talking about poetry. We're all busy adults and we all have work and job, and it is a rare moment to get to focus for an hour even on just talking about poetry. You know, it's a beautiful moment, and I thank you all for joining me and sharing in that tonight, and sharing your poems as well. You know, I'm trying to read more, trying to write more, and this is a great jump back into it. You know, it's hearing you all and talking about place and the very different definitions of it, right, and how that all comes into your writing was wonderful. So thank you, and on behalf of Broadleaf, thank you once again for joining us. Everybody, go buy their books, go read their stuff. Their websites are all on the chat there. Go to broadleafwriters.com. Go to our Right Now page, and you can see the link to it, to all their websites there from the Facebook event. Get their stuff, buy their poems, get inspired, read some books, write some poems. It's that easy. National Poetry Month. Your assignment from Justin, if you choose to accept it, because I was a teacher back in the day, is to read a poem or to write a poem, and that's my directive to you. And with that, I will leave you all to have a good rest of your night and a good rest of your National Poetry Month. And thank you once again, everybody. You've made my heart full this evening. So
thank you.
Bon voyage,
Thank
everybody.
you. Much love.
Yes. All right,
Thank you, Justin, for the invitation and for all you do. And thank you, Donney and Ola.